Thanks, Nicole, for that introduction. And welcome again, everybody, to our special I Love Yarn Day class with Lion Brand, taught by Darren there. We're going to be showing you how to use our new Woolies Air yarn, which is delightfully fluffy. There it is on screen, to make a granny square. And then if you make a bunch of those, you can sew them together into a sweater. If you have any questions on the material we're covering during class, go ahead and drop that in the chat, and I will either answer directly or I can pass that on to Darren and he can demonstrate for us on screen. And I think with all of that extra nonsense out of the way, we'll let Darren go ahead and get started.
Hi, welcome to class. Today we are going to be featuring, like Claire said, it's brand new. It's just hitting stores pretty like last week, or it's only been in, maybe it's just hitting your store maybe this week. It's one of the newest yarns out, and it's called Woolies Aire, and it's very light and it's very fluffy. It has that mohair look without having all of the itch and the allergy. Sometimes people are allergic to mohair, so this is an opportunity to have that great fuzzy mohair look and feel without having actual mohair. So it's a little bit easier to wear. So if we want to go ahead and switch the view to the view of my hands, we'll go ahead and jump in and get started. So today in class, we are using, let's just look at the label a little bit. We're using this Woolies Aire. It is considered to be a number 6 or bulky weight yarn, even though you're using a little bit smaller needle. So this is using a J10 crochet hook or a size 10 knitting needle, which is a little small for a bulky yarn, but because it's so fuzzy, all of this fuzz kind of takes up the extra space, and that's what fluffs it out and makes it into more of a bulky yarn. So even if you're crocheting it on a J, it's still going to fluff out and be a lot bigger and kind of take up all that extra space. So it's really a fun yarn to work with. It's hand washed, lay flat to dry because of all the fuzziness. We want to make sure we maintain that nice fuzzy feel without it getting too fuzzy. It's 74% acrylic, 13% wool, and 13% polyester. So it's really, really nice to work with. So any questions about the yarn or the care or the fiber content? It comes in a lot of really great colors. I have this blue, the white, the mint right here with me today. It also comes, I have a sample of the black. And then the sweater that I made, I used pink, white, and black. But it comes in, how many colors does it come in, Claire? Do you know how many?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot
I
here.
know it
I
comes in
don't
a
think this
lot.
is even on our website yet. So
No, this is right, it's right out of right off the spinning machine. So
it is.
okay. Yeah, but lots and lots of really great colors. If you go to michaels.com, you can look at all the colors and then just pop into the store, and that way you get to feel it and see how nice it feels in person. So the Granny Square sweater that we're going to be talking about, it's actually based on this pattern. So because this yarn is so new, we do have a lot of patterns online made with the yarn, but I wanted to do a Granny Square sweater. So I'm going to kind of adapt this existing sweater that's made with a different yarn, and I'm going to talk about how we can adapt that to the yarn that we want to use today. So the most important thing about this sweater is if you look at the back, you can see the schematic. And that is basically just telling us how to arrange the squares to make the sweater. And so there's a schematic for this extra small and the extra small and the medium large is the same schematic. And then on the back, we have the 1, 2, 3X, and then the 4, 5X is also the same schematic. I don't know if you can see, it looks kind of bleached out on my screen, but hopefully you can print it out and look at it. So what makes the difference in the sizes of this? I thought this was very clever. You can use a different size crochet hook. So when you're making a square, if you use a smaller hook, which is the I9 or a 5mm, you're going to make a square that's 4.5 by 4.5. But by using a different size hook, So for this pattern, they're using a K, which is a 6.5 millimeter. You make a larger square, which is 5.5 by 5.5. And then by combining that with whichever schematic that you want to use, you will be able to make your sweater in a different size that will fit you and suit your needs a little bit better. So that way you can follow the same pattern for the square, but just make it different by using a different size hook. So now with all that being said, we're not using this yarn. What I did was I made a square out of the Woolies Aire that I'm going to be that we're talking about today. And I, instead of using 4 colors as is in the original pattern, I only used 3 with a J hook. And my square is just about 4.5 inches. So that's really what I need. I don't have to use all the colors because the main goal is to make the square the proper size. So by using a like if I wanted to use all the colors, maybe I would go down a hook size or two, make my square smaller, and then I could use 4 colors and still have 4.5 inches. But you have to be careful going down too many hook sizes because then your fabric will start to become very stiff and it might not be nice for a sweater. So that's why I stopped at 3 colors, and that is my 4.5. Now to make a 5.5 square, you could try going up a hook size, maybe 1 hook size or maybe 2 hook sizes. And then that would make your square larger. And so that's basically how we're going to achieve gauge. We're going to use a different yarn, different hooks, but we can still achieve gauge just by measuring it carefully and watching how we're doing it. And then you might have to make 3 or 4 squares until you find out the right way to get the correct gauge. So any questions about that? Does that make sense, Claire?
Yeah, I think that's a fun way to do it. Like you said,
Yeah.
using gauge to adjust your size rather than adding or subtracting rows.
Yeah.
And I was
And-
just like we were saying, you're only using 3 colors per square, but if you wanted to have more of like a crazy multicolor, then just use different colors in each square.
oh yeah, that would be a good idea too. That would make it fun. So
Yeah. And
what do
use
you
those
think?
gauge swatches to figure out your color patterns, make them useful.
And that's actually a good use. People think about a gauge swatch and they feel like they're only um like working that swatch to find out the gauge, but you're actually looking at like the color combinations and see how the color combinations look. You're deciding, do I like working with this yarn for this pattern? You're seeing how the fabric feels. Is it flexible or is it stiff? So the gauge swatch tells us a lot more than just about gauge. So that's why they're really so important. And even though nobody likes them, we should try to embrace them.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Do you think if, say, I wanted to make this square 5.5 inches, and if I want to round it with another color, do you think if I want to round it with just single crochet instead of double, that might be a fun way to try it? Or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, and especially with a larger, fluffier yarn like this, that's going to
Yeah.
add more. And remember, you're adding to 2 sides of the square. So you may add
Yes.
only a half inch on one side, but double
Then
that
it's a
and you've
whole
added an
inch.
inch.
Yeah. So, but that's why it'll be, you can have a lot of fun with this and make different size squares and different colors and then just measure them as you're going. And this one is slightly bigger. Not really though, because by the time you kind of push the fluff in, it's pretty close to 4.5. So another thing after you make your squares, and some people don't like to block their squares because they feel like when they sew them together, they kind of all fit together and kind of block themselves. But I do like to block my. Do you block your granny squares, Claire, or do you not?
I do block my granny
Yeah.
squares.
I block mine. I feel like it's going to give you the most professional and the nicest finish. And the way to block them the way I like to block them, and then maybe Claire will have a different opinion, is I will soak my squares in like a bowl of warm water, just like warm to the touch. You don't want it to be hot or anything. Doesn't have to be cold, but just like room temperature. Submerge them in warm water for like, let them soak for like 10 or 15 minutes. And then when you take them out of the water, you kind of want to press the water out of them so that they're not real heavy. And then I lay mine out in a nice fluffy bath towel, and then I roll them up like a jelly roll so that they're all in there together. And then I put it down on the floor and I step on them. inside the towel, and that presses almost all the excess water out of them. And then after I do that, I use blocking wires sometimes, but I'll just pin them down on my blocking boards. Um, you have to make sure you're using stainless steel pins, because if you don't have stainless steel pins, then they can actually leave rust marks behind. And if you don't have blocking boards, you can pin them out on something like a yoga mat. But you want to make sure you're pinning them out on something that's not going to absorb water, because if you pin them out to like a something that's cloth, then it'll just suck in the water and it'll take a lot longer to dry. And then after that, you just pin them out to the exact measurement that you wanted them to be. So we would pin these out 4.5 by 4.5. And then when they dry, they'll maintain that, and the corners will be very crisp. And when you sew them together, everything will match up very nicely. So how is that how you do it, Claire, or do you like a different way?
That's pretty much how I do it. Yeah, I would say that works well for like natural fiber yarns and blends. If you've got a yarn that's all acrylic, I usually prefer to steam block it. So if you've got like an iron with a steam setting or a garment steamer, pin them out first, give them a little blast of steam. Don't touch your iron to your yarn. That's not good.
Mhm. No.
And then just leave them there till they're totally dry. And that also works.
Have you ever had the steam affect the acrylic in any way, or do you think it
Only if I spend too long in one spot. So you kind of have
gotcha.
to keep it moving.
Keep it moving quickly? Like give it a little hit of the steam, and then if you feel like it needs more steam, let it kind of rest for a minute and then go back to it.
Exactly. You can
Yeah,
always add more, but you can't take it all away.
and take it away. Yeah, because it can. I've never had it happen, but I've heard that sometimes it can singe a little bit if you get them too hot. So, all right. Any questions about any of that?
I think we are ready to move into the crocheting.
So I just made these squares just kind of to confirm, like, or to kind of go on what we were talking about. I made them with different size hooks, and you can see they all kind of turned out to be different sizes. Um, so just by playing around, you can make them, make some in different squares and different sizes and see what you're going to get. I'm going to demonstrate today with wool ease thick and quick when I'm teaching. And the reason I'm using wool ease thick and quick for demonstrating is because it's such a smooth yarn, and the stitches are going to be very large, so it'll be easy for you to see what I'm doing. The wool ease Aire is, because it's a very, very fuzzy yarn, it's not as easy to see what how I'm working the stitches together. But that's why granny squares are a great project for this yarn, because you don't have to find the stitch you're working into. We're going to be working mainly into the chain two spaces, which are very easy to work into. So I've had people say before about fuzzy yarn, it's really hard to crochet with. But this will give you some great practice working with it, and then you'll be ready to take on any project at all after you've had some experience working with it. So do you like fuzzy yarn, Claire, or what do you like?
I like it in moderation. I think it's got like for, a touch of accent, maybe like holding together with something else to add a little halo. That's nice.
Yeah, I do love a fuzzy yarn, but I do like to hold it together with the smooth yarn and get that. Sometimes it adds a little bit of a tweed effect too. So, all right, so granny squares, there are many, many ways of making a granny square. And you can, for the kind of work we're doing today, you can choose any pattern of granny square that you want. You can make any style, you can make any pattern. The goal is just to make sure that they're the right size. So you either want one that's 4.5 or 5.5 inches square. And by adjusting your hook size and how many colors you're using, that's how you're going to achieve that. So I'm just going to show you how to start a few granny squares, and then we're going to look at how the pattern is starting theirs. So I like to, I start with a slip knot, and with a granny square, it's really nice if the tail of the slip knot controls how big the slip knot is, because then we can use that to cinch it up and tighten that center square closed. So if you tie your slip knot like this, so this method is called short over long. We're going to put the short tail over top of the long yarn, which basically is our working yarn. And we're going to make a loop. Put your hand in the center of the loop, and you're going to kind of go under that loop. You're going to grab the tail of your, grab a hold of that tail, and then you're going to hold the working yarn and the tail together, and you're going to loop that back through. And so that's just a basic slip knot, but the difference is the tail is what controls the size of the slip knot. And I'm going to show you why that's helpful. So I'm going to pop that right on my crochet hook, and I'm going to chain 3 because I'm going to work on double crochet. So 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to do I'm going to do 2 double crochets in the center of that chain. And so what we've got is I've got my chain 3, and that counts as a double crochet, and then I have 1, 2 double crochets. And I'm going to chain 2 for my corners, and I'm going to do 3 double crochets in that same slip knot that I worked in before. So just 3 double crochets, just like normal. 1, 2. And if you're new to granny squares, one thing that makes it a little easier to kind of keep track of where you are is if you put a stitch marker on each corner. So each time we do a chain 2 space, that's going to create a corner. And then if you put a stitch marker there to mark it, it just kind of helps visualize what's happening and keep it easy. So chain 2 space, and then I'm going to do 3 double crochets. So 1, 2, 3. So see, it's almost working into a square already. So chain 2, put my stitch marker, and I'm going to do 3 double crochets again in that same center. In that same center. And now I have to finish my last corner. So I'm going to chain 2, and I'm going to join it with a slip stitch to the top of that first chain 3 that I did, right? And then I'm going to cut it and join a new color. And you fasten off just by pulling it through. And there I've got my 4 corners. I'm going to mark them with my stitch markers. Then you can see it is already starting to form a square. Now you get this big opening in the center, and sometimes you might want to leave that opening. It's fine. But if you don't want that, so here's the whole reason why I tie the slip knot the way I do, because when you pull it, you pull that tail, you can see it cinches everything shut. And then you've got a nice closed circle in the center. So Claire, how do you feel about magic? Is it magic circle? Is that what it's called?
Magic circle or magic ring. Yeah, yeah. I think this makes a very similar effect, basically, but
Yeah,
you don't have to
right?
do the like little loop it over your finger, weave your hook in and out mess.
Yeah, I'm gonna admit something here because we're all friends. I don't know how to do the magic circle or the magic ring. Um, every time I watch a video on it, I'm like, why that's like I'm just gonna do it the way I do it this way. This way seems just as good. Like, why do I need to like wrap it around my finger and put the hook through it and say magic words and have a stress attack? And I watched a video recently and it was 15 minutes long, Claire. Does it take 15 minutes to learn it?
I don't think so, no, but
Yeah, I was very confused at the end of that, but this is the way I do it. So I feel like the magic ring, maybe this is controversy here. You heard it here first. I feel like the magic ring's unnecessary. Is that a bold thing for me to say?
that might be a hot take. Yeah.
It's a hot take. I think that's very bold. So, but this is one way of doing it. And then I have another way that I actually prefer of doing it that I still think is better than the magic ring. So the next one I'll show you the other way. But I want to show you how to add the next color. So this is our first round. Any questions about the first round or how we got here?
I think
How do
you've
we
got
start?
some new converts to that method of starting your granny square in the chat here.
We should start a club. I feel like we need to organize as a group, like some kind of a political movement. And so here's another thing. So this was my square, and this is the front of it. Do you ever turn your squares and like work on the front and then the back and the front and the back? Is
Not
that
usually, no. I always keep the same side facing me.
sometimes when I keep the same side facing me, it ends up looking like it's twisted. It doesn't look like it's square. Do you ever get that twisted effect?
That's why I do the blocking. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, even with blocking though, sometimes it's like really twisted. It's like, but I find if I work and then turn it and work on the other side, sometimes I don't get that twisted look. So, as people are working on their squares, you can try it and see which way works best for you. So, but if you when you're making your square, sometimes I'll put a stitch marker on the front, and then I remember if I twist it, I know which side I'm on because sometimes it's hard to tell. So, so for this point, maybe I'll just stay on the same side. And then to join your next color, you can join it in any one of these chain two spaces, but I don't like to join it in the same one that I ended the last one on. I like to go to a different one. So it doesn't matter which one, but I'm just going to go to this one. What do you do, Claire? Do you join it in the same one or do you like to move to the next one?
I like to move to the next one. I think that helps when you're weaving in all these ends.
Yeah,
It
I
keeps
think so.
spreads out the bulk.
So this is how I add a new color. I just lay my yarn over my hook and I just bring it in and then I join it with a slip stitch and I'm going to be working on doubles. So I'm going to chain three. And I've seen other ways of joining it, but I feel like that's the easiest way. And now I'm going to do 3 double crochets in this corner. Do you ever do granny squares instead of like double? Do you ever do singles or triples or like, it seems like it's mostly doubles, right?
I think doubles is quite traditional. Yeah, yeah. I've done it with half double before, I think.
Yeah, I do love a half double. So that might be another way to kind of achieve the right size square. Maybe you'll do half double. Maybe you'll do 2 rounds of double and 1 round of half double. Maybe that would help, get you the right size. Okay, so I did 3 doubles for the corner. I'm going to chain 2 to turn the corner and move my stitch marker. And I'm going to do 3 doubles on the other side of that corner to kind of take me around the corner. Do you ever use stitch markers to keep track, or you probably don't need to anymore, do you?
I did when I was starting out. They're very handy tools. Yeah. And
I don't use
especially
them
like if you're going to use the Woolies Air and you said it's so fuzzy, it's hard
so
to
fuzzy.
find that
Yeah,
stitch. So the stitch markers are your friend.
they are your friend. Yeah, I don't use them for this type of granny square really anymore, but when I'm doing a solid one to kind of keep track of that triple crochet in the corner, I find it helpful. But that's for a different day. So for each corner, you're going to do 3 double crochet, chain 2 to turn your corner, and then 3 double crochet. And that's what makes your corner. And then some crochet patterns will have you do a chain 1 or chain 2 in between, and some will not. So for the one I'm doing right now, I'm just going to not do a chain 2 in between, and I'm just going to jump right in. Sometimes it makes it more flexible or it gives you a little bit more leeway if you do those chains in between, but it's not always necessary, but the pattern will tell you what you should do. Okay. And this is pretty much how I do my granny squares. Move my corner. But these are really easy to find, these corners. So after you get a little bit of practice, you probably won't need to really keep track of them with the stitch markers, but it is handy. And then of course, then this one make sure you know that you're working always on one side of, with the right side. Because if you lay it down and come back to it like after lunch or something, you might turn it over by mistake. And then you just join it in the top of that chain 3, join it with a slip stitch, cut your yarn, leaving enough for a tail, and then pull it straight up to fasten off. Okay, any questions about that second round?
I was just thinking about what you said with for those chain one spaces along the sides. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's more common if you're using a thinner yarn.
Yeah,
Yeah, because a chunky yarn like this, it's going to leave enough space between those stitches that you
yeah,
can still find that.
I think so too. So, I think if you can do it or not do it, and maybe make one doing it that way and make one not doing it, and then see which one works better for whatever yarn you're using. You can do it either way, I think. Don't you think?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Play around a little, see what works best for you, what you like the look of.
So any questions about how we got here?
I think we're good.
For the next round, I want to show you something else that I like to do that's a little different. So when you're joining the new color, traditionally, you join your color and you chain 3, and that counts as your first double crochet. But something I've been doing lately that's a little different is I'm going to join my color with a slip stitch. And then instead of doing a chain 3, I've been doing something called a standing double crochet, which looks almost just like a double crochet. So that way you don't get that chain 3. Because if you look right here, you can see that chain 3 looks a little different right here. Doesn't look a lot different. Um, but it does give a little different look, and sometimes it shows up. So for a standing double crochet, there's 2 different ways of doing it. The correct way is you kind of pull up a big loop like this. You have to keep your finger on that loop. You can't let it twist or else it'll kind of all fall apart in your hand. So keep your finger on that loop. You So to do a double crochet, you start with the yarn over. So this is the yarn over for this one. You bring it towards yourself and you kind of use that loop as your yarn over. So you bring it towards yourself and you yarn over that loop, and then you enter the stitch, bring up a loop, and then you bring it through 2 like you do a normal double crochet. And then you can see, I think that looks more like a double crochet. And then you just do your next 2 double crochets to finish the cluster of 3. And then I think that looks really like 3 double crochets like normal. What do you think of that, Claire?
Yeah, that was a cool technique. Yep.
Kind of is that controversial or not? Do you think that's okay?
No, I think I've been seeing that a little bit more recently, the standing double technique.
And when I first started doing that, I had a hard time getting when I would pull this up like this, and when I would go to do it, and if you slip off your finger, then you kind of lose it. And if you when you're doing this, sometimes then it would slip off, and then I would kind of lose where I was. And so I'm going to show you the wrong way of doing it, but it still works out okay.
Can I
So
ask you just to demonstrate in the darker color? I think with the
oh,
light
darker color.
color yarn and the light, extra bright light there. It's a little glary.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll do it here. So I'm going to do it a different way, which is kind of not technically right, but it still works because sometimes that loop, when I was first learning it, that loop would slip. So I would just go ahead and start with um, pull up my loop, and then I have 2 loops on my hook, but they're separated. And so then all you do is you kind of wrap your yarn around it and then bring it through and then bring it through. And then that kind of gives it almost the same look, but it's a little easier. So that's kind of like an alternative way of doing it. But either way will work. So bring up a loop, put your finger on that loop, yarn over, enter the stitch, or enter your chain two space. And you have to make sure you're maintaining that, oops, see, I let go of it and it unraveled. So yarn over, enter your chain two space, bring it up, then bring it through two, then bring it through two. And then that gives you a very nice standing double crochet, and it all blends in perfectly. So I've been really enjoying that lately. So, okay. Any questions about that? Do we like that, or do we don't like it, or what do we think?
I think that's a very cool technique.
And once you get the hang of it, it's quite easy, but a little bit fiddly at first.
I feel like most things are a little bit fiddly when you're learning them.
Yeah.
So,
And so I don't know if I'm going to completely finish this round because I want to show you guys something else. But when you start the next round, just remember you have to do your corners, and then you also have to do this extra space here. So you start with your corner, and then you do three doubles in this kind of middle. It's not a chain two space because we didn't chain two, but it's just kind of that middle space. Do your three doubles there, and then go do your three doubles in the next corner, which is a chain two space. But I wanted to show you another trick so that instead of magic ring, I have another way I like to do it. And so then you will just chain two and go around that corner, and then you'll just finish all the sides in the same manner where you would go to this next space and then do the next corner and go all the way around. So any questions about that third round? And then if you do a fourth round, then you just have to remember to do all of these spaces. So, and that's how it gets bigger because each time you go around, you have more spaces to fill in. Does that make sense?
yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. All right, let me start another one. So with this one, I'm going to start, sometimes when you do a granny square, so you want to leave a little bit extra of a tail here, but sometimes when you do a granny square, you start with chain five. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then, or chain three, and then you join to make a ring. And then I'm going to do my standing double crochet right here from the very beginning. So here's my tail. I left a long tail. So I'm going to make sure I'm going to crochet around this tail and kind of conceal it that way. So I'm going to do 2 double crochets to finish this cluster of 3. So I've got my standing double and then my 2, chain 2 for the corner, and 1, 2, 3, chain 2. And so here's my tail. So make sure I'm going to go around the tail. So kind of hold the tail along that chain 5. And see, I'm just working around it. I'm kind of concealing that tail in the middle of my, see how I'm just kind of going around it. It's in the middle of my double crochets. And sometimes you do this so you don't have to weave in the ends. I'm being a little more tricky this time. I'm using it for something else. So 1, 2, 3. So you can see that tail is completely concealed under all of my doubles. So chain 2. There's my, I have to finish my corner. And then fasten off. And so I started with a chain 5, and usually when you start with a chain 5, you do end up with that center hole, which is decorative. So you can decide, do I like that center hole or do I not like it? You know what? I don't like it. So I'm going to pull my tail, and just like that, it's a magic ring. It's like a secret built-in magic ring. And then when you weave that shut, it'll stay. Isn't that the same as magic ring, Claire?
I mean, you're getting the same effect in the end, so it's like a
So,
super
and then
secret magic ring.
if you don't do that, if you don't even pretend you just didn't even chain or crochet over the tail, but then you decide you wanted to pull it shut, all you have to do is take that tail then and just weave it in, kind of like a drawstring, through those double crochets around that first. See how I'm doing that? I'm just weaving them in all the way around and then pull it. And that's not going to open. I think magic rings completely unnecessary. Don't tell anyone. They'll come for me. This is an election year. We cannot talk about controversial issues, right?
It'll be our little secret.
Our little secret. But how do our students feel about that? What do you guys think?
Oh, this is a good name. You can call it the Morris magic ring.
The Morris magic ring. I think it's it. I think I need to write a book. We're writing books, Claire. Writing books. All right. Any questions about anything that we've talked about? Any questions? How about the non-magical Morris ring? I think that's a good idea.
Non-magical. There we go. We're
Non-magical.
just regular.
We're just regular. Any questions?
I think we are good to continue.
So this pattern, if we decide we do want to follow this pattern, this granny square actually started out in a way I've never started a granny square before. So I just want to touch on that quickly.
Oh, can you hold that
So
closer to your screen, Darren? It's doing some weird
okay.
stuff.
Okay, so with the first color, chain three, two double crochet in the third chain from the hook. The two skipped count as a double crochet. And then you're going to chain two, and then three double crochets in the same chain. So when I first read that, I thought, that's not right. That won't work. And I worked it up and it works, but it's just different than what I've ever seen before. So let me demonstrate that. So we're going to chain three. And so to count your chains, always remember the one on your hook counts as zero. So 0, 1, 2, 3. So this is our first chain. And we're going to work two double crochets in that. So 1, 2. So what we're doing here is we're using that first chain as kind of like the slip knot or the center of your magic ring or the center of your chain 5. And then, have you ever done this before, Claire, like this way?
I have done this before, actually.
I've never done this before. I mean, it works up the same. So it's, if you're making this, you can choose which way you want to start it, and they're all fine. But I just never did it before. I've never done this before, so I wanted to kind of just touch on it so people can see. Yeah, when when I read that, I thought that's not right. That's not going to work, but it actually works perfectly. And then see, and at this point, you can continue to kind of chain over your tail if you decide you want to pull that shut at the end. Like kind of like I just showed you. And then that way you can choose to have that center open or you can close it later, but you can maybe decide that after you finish your squares and start seeing how they look when you kind of put them together. Maybe that opening maybe that's nice. For different projects, you want them more solid, and other projects you might want it more open. And then you
Yeah, I was
do,
going to say the one difference with working into that first chain is then you can't sort of cinch it shut like you have been doing.
actually, you can.
Well, I suppose with your extra super secret technique, yes.
The super secret. See, and then you just take this tail and then you just go under all those first, and then you cinch it shut like a drawstring. Just pull it through all of that, and then you could cinch it shut. The non-magic Morse ring or something. I don't know. We'll work on that. We'll brainstorm. All right. Any questions? But look, even if you just made like tiny squares like this with just one round, if you sewed all these together, wouldn't that be cute? That would be cute with all these little squares. Like you don't have to make all different colors and different sizes. You could just make, you know,
Yeah, and if you've got like a bunch of sort of odds and ends and leftover balls, you might make a bunch of tinier squares just to use those up.
And then by the time you sew them together, it'll be 6 inches square. And so that's not much different than 5.5 inches. So you could make your sweater out of like little clusters of 4 squares to make the squares. That might be cute.
Yeah.
Just all
Quick
different.
question. What size hook are you using to demonstrate with a Woolies Thick and Quick?
I've actually been using a couple different ones. I'm either using a 9, 8, 9, or 10. And that's what I use here to give me different sizes. So I keep picking up different ones as I'm practicing.
And
But
those are the US
typically,
sizes or the millimeter?
I'm sorry, these are millimeters. 8 millimeter, 9 millimeter, or 10, which is an L, an N, or sorry, L, M, or N. Yeah, L, M, or N, or an 8, 9, or 10. But the Woolies Thick and Quick actually calls for an N13, which is a 9 millimeter. But you can go up or down the size, it just depending on what your tension is like. Any questions?
That was it.
Let's look at let's look at sewing them together, because after you make them, that's kind of the next thing you need to know. And after you like sew them, once you know how to make them and then sew them together, you can make anything. Um, you can sew them together in the shape of a sweater or a blanket or a pair of shorts. I'm seeing a lot of granny square pants, which are really cool. So, you can really do anything once you sew them together. Um, and it's really quite easy. So there's a couple, I made these 3 squares that are the same size so that I could show you how to sew them together. And so what you want is a large-eyed blunt needle that's has a large enough eye for yarn, and it's blunt because you're going between the strands of yarn, you're not piercing them. And when I make, this is just my preference, when I make granny squares and I'm going to sew them together, I like to do the last round in all the same color. And then I'm going to sew these together using this purple, and then my seam is always invisible. So even if I don't do a good job seaming, and you can see my yarn that I'm sewing with, it's going to blend into both squares perfectly. And even if, like, say I wanted all different colors of granny squares, I would still probably do the last round, maybe in just single crochet all the way around, in whatever color I'm going to seam it in, just to make it easier for seaming. What do you do that, Claire, or you don't worry about it?
Yeah, that's a good way to do it, like you said. And then it's sort of unites the whole project together too.
Yeah, I think so. I like it that way. So I'm gonna seam these. With all that being said, I'm gonna seam these with this cream color today, just so that you can see what I'm doing easier. But just know that I personally would never do that. I would use the same color that I made them, which makes it much, much easier. Okay, so there's many, many ways of doing it. So just make sure you're picking the sides of these that look the best. Um, make sure you're doing the front, or if you made them reversible, just whichever side looks the best. And then if you hold them together, so look at what we've done. I've got a chain two space, I've got 3 double crochets, a chain two space, 3 double crochets, a chain two space, 3 double crochets, and a chain two space. So you find I've got one chain here and one chain here. So I'm going to pick that second chain um, on each one. And now I've got 3 double crochets. So I'm just going to go through each one of my 3 double crochets one at a time. And I'm doing the running stitch. It's going to go back and forth.
And do you have these with right sides together or wrong sides together?
With this method, I would do it with right sides together, because then your seam is going to be on the inside, and then these are the 2 sides I picked that I liked better. And then now that I've sewed my 3 double crochets together, I'm just going to go to the next 3 double crochets. So 1, 2, 3. And basically you're just going to the next stitches that you see. So you want to, if you were going to crochet these, you're going to add another, so like just say you're going to do not granny square technique where you're working in the space, but if you were just like crocheting, this is the stitch where you would use if you're crocheting like a scarf or a blanket or something. So that's the same stitches we're going to use when we're sewing. Does that look, I mean, can you see what I'm doing?
Yeah, and you're just sort of going back and forth there, back and forth, almost like threading a shoelace or something.
Yep. And I'm just doing each stitch. I'm not skipping any. And then remember here on the corner, I have 2 chains, so I'm just going to go in 1 for this side. And then and that's how you sew those 2 together. And then I'll sew this next one this way. And then what you'll keep going, you have to cut your yarn and then rejoin it. Now you can also just crochet them together. You don't have to sew them. And I'm going to show you how to do that next. It's pretty much the same thing. Again, I would use the same yarn. I wouldn't use a different color. So I'm just going to find my chain twos, those chain twos, and I'm going to go right into them. Now, sometimes if I'm not like really worried about it so much, I won't go into the chain twos. I'll just kind of go under that chain 2 space. Or you can actually find, there's my chain 1, there's my chain 2. You can actually enter the chain when you do that, which is probably technically more correct. What do you think? Is it more correct or does it matter?
I think, like you said, it's technically more correct, but if it's just too hard to find that chain, go in the space. It will be fine.
It's fine, yeah. So you can do it with a slip stitch or you can do it with a single crochet. If you do it with a slip stitch, um, I don't like this as much. It's probably a less bulky seam, but when you do it with a slip stitch, you can see how it kind of only forms on one side. And even though that's on the inside, I don't know if I like that as much. Um, I'll probably, when I do it, I tend to do it as a single crochet, which might not be the best choice, but I'll just do it like this. And you see how it forms the seam on the top edge, which probably gives a bulkier seam, but it's more symmetrical, and I like that better, but maybe I'm just weird that way. I don't know. What do you like better, Claire? How do you do it?
I think I would prefer the slip stitch because it's less bulky, but I think
Yeah,
I might also do that from the right side. So then it's like a little bit of extra visual interest.
yeah. Because if you do it the way I'm doing it, you do get more of a bulky seam. But that's just me. I mean, I guess we like the things we like, or we do things the way we like them. And that's the best part. It's your project. You can do whatever you want, right? And maybe you'll be sorry. Maybe you'll make the wrong choice, and then next time you'll know. But yeah, I tend to do it that way for some reason. I just, for some reason, feel like that's not symmetrical and it bothers me. Right. Any questions about seaming?
And you said you would block your squares before you seamed them, right?
I would block my squares before I seam them, and sometimes I block them again after I seam them because I'm just completely a complete lunatic. Like after I've seamed them all together, sometimes I'll block it again to just make sure everything's really square and the corners are really nice. Is that overdoing it?
No, no, I was going to say I probably wouldn't do like a full-on block, but that is where I would get my steamer out and just like give a quick steam to the actual seam and make that part relax.
Yeah, because it does affect the way it is. I mean, you really do want to make sure
Yeah.
everything
Quick
is as nice as
question. Do you
possible.
ever use the invisible seaming technique, especially like on garments like this?
Like the mattress stitch or like what?
Yeah, I think the mattress stitch, basically. Mhm.
Yeah, you absolutely can. And I don't usually think of that when I'm crocheting for some reason, and I know it works beautifully for crochet, but um in my mind, for some reason, that's more of a knitted thing. So for mattress stitch, you do this from the right side. And basically, you're just kind of go back and forth. So I'm picking up the post. Is that how you do it, Claire? Do you pick up the post of the crochet stitch?
Yeah, basically go like right underneath that little V at the top as close as you
Yeah.
can get.
And it doesn't start out looking so good. See if I'm doing it right. I think I'm doing it right. I'm a bit out of practice doing this with crochet. And it looks horrible and you're about to give up. And then when you pull it, it turns the seam onto the inside and it joins it very nicely. It is invisible. And then the inside seam is, this is probably the best way, don't you think? Maybe this is actually the best way because that seam is almost invisible and it's quite flat. It's not bulky. And then you can kind of see it's kind of sewn together that way. This is probably the best way. I don't know why I don't do this every time. What do you think? Do you think this is probably the best way, Claire, or no?
Yeah, I think if I'm not doing, a fancier like join as you go technique, which we're not covering in this class, just to mention it,
And I've never done
this is
that, so we're
probably
not
how
covering it.
yes, I would like to I do this method.
I'm gonna have to start doing this because I know this. I mean, I have done this in the past many times, but I just always crochet them together. I guess I think I'm crocheting. I should continue crocheting. But yeah,
This
that's
is a
almost,
little bit slower too, I think. And so if you just want to
yeah,
get the finishing stuff out of the way, because it's always people's least favorite part.
yeah. But it does look so good. Like I need to just kind of recommit to this. Yeah. And then if you want to crochet a border, that this sweater does call for a crochet border. Um, the main thing you have to worry about is the corners. Everything else is pretty simple because if you were just crocheting a regular blanket or something, you would enter the stitch. You have the stitches there, so you would just enter them. So when you're crocheting along, basically you can just enter each stitch. So you would either do a standing double or a single or whatever you're doing. I'm just going to chain one for a single, or let's do half double. I'll chain two and do half double. And then you just do it in each stitch across, pretty much. And then if it lays flat, it should lay flat, then you're fine. Um, if you're crocheting extra tight or something because you're crocheting into the stitch, not into the space, you could try going up a hook size maybe to make sure it's laying flat. Um, if you feel like that was too big of a jump there, sometimes, and this is kind of trial and error as you go, maybe you can just go ahead and do one in that space and then go to the next one. So depending on how tight your crochet square or your granny squares are, and depending on how tight you're crocheting, and maybe the yarn, how thick the yarn is, different projects might work up differently. You might just want to do a little trial and error for that. But when you get to the corner, I would just go around it. I'm not going to try to go into the chain because I only have two chains there. And for the corner, it's nice to do five. So I do two, two stitches for the corner or for this side. And then I do one stitch that's going to kind of turn the corner. And then I do two stitches on the other side of that corner. And that is going to turn the corner for me and lay flat. If you don't do that, it can cause your corner to buckle and kind of fold in on itself. And if you do too many stitches in the corner, then it could cause it to ruffle. But you see how that lays flat? Otherwise, if you don't do enough there, then your corner is going to kind of do that. It's going to kind of turn up, but you want it to lay flat. And then this is something when you block it, you can kind of pin it out and steam it a bit, and then it'll lay perfectly flat. So does that make sense? Any questions about, have we done that before?
Yeah, it's a good way to do it because you got to have enough fabric to go all the way around the corner there.
Yeah. And sometimes you can do it with three, like you can do one, two, and then three and go around. If you want to do it that way, just do it and then, work a couple of inches up and make sure it's laying flat before you finish the whole thing. So that's one of the things in crochet, depending on your tension and how tight it is and the yarn choice and there can be many different things that make a difference. You know, maybe one way's better for one person, one way's better for a different person. So it's better just kind of try the best way you think and see how it looks before you continue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left here. If anyone wants to get any last minute questions into the chat there. Just a reminder that this class was recorded, so you'll be able to watch it back on the Michael's YouTube channel on Monday. It is a Saturday after all, they get a weekend.
Yes.
And if you had fun with us, we hope that you would join us in our upcoming classes. We've got one coming up on the 23rd. That's a Wednesday. That is going to be all about the world of Woolies. So we'll be talking about the Woolies Thick and Quick, the Woolies Aire, and some of the other members of that yarn family. And then on Monday, October 28th, we're going to be getting you ready for winter and showing you how to make some mittens, again, with that nice fluffy, fuzzy Woolies Aire. If you want to start warming up your hands, if you need to start getting ready for gifts, mittens make great gifts. And then on November 4th, we're going to be showing you how to do some other granny square techniques. Darren's got a little preview for you there. So you can make a solid granny square if you want an even warmer, cuddlier sweater.
Mhm.
Yes, exactly. Just in time for winter, at least for us up here in this hemisphere.
And
Thank you
that's with
all
this
so much
yarn.
for joining us. Yeah, I like this one. This is a nice, the Woolies Roving Origins. It's one of my new favorites.
It's one of my new favorites too. I love it.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Well, we're so glad that you all joined us this morning. We hope that you go forth and practice your granny squares and enjoy experimenting with them. And hopefully, we see you in future classes.
Oh, Claire, and maybe you'll put my Instagram handle in the chat. And if anyone has any questions at all about anything we covered today or just in general about crochet, you can feel free to send me a direct message and I'll be able to get back to you pretty quick. So I don't get many, so don't hesitate. If you do have a question, you can send me a direct message on Instagram. Maybe Claire will put it in the chat.
Yes, I just put it in there. You're Mr.
Okay.
Woolly Bear.
Mr. Woolly Bear. Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming to class. Have a great weekend.